He had walked through Almaton to rest and lie in thin December sun, uncrushed, not timid, but perfect there. His dream words fished out beside an untrimmed singing verge.
Hello, poets and poetry lovers. My name is Florrie, and today's Meet the Poet features the fantastic poet that is Chris Emery. A poet as well as a literary publisher and former director at Cambridge University Press, Chris is here today to read from his fourth and forthcoming collection, Modern Fog, which pays tribute to his time spent living in Norfolk. His poetry welcomes readers to be embraced by different worlds and to venture through Chris's own cherished experiences and memories interwoven with beautiful landscapes. Now, you can get involved in this Meet the Poet by commenting your questions and thoughts on Chris's work. And of course, do drop us a like, subscribe to us on Facebook and YouTube, and follow us on all of our social platforms at Homestage Poetry. Now, let's get started. Chris, welcome to Meet the Poet. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm very well, Florrie. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm flattered, I'm honoured, and looking forward to taking part.
Really pleased to have you here. So let's kick off by hearing a bit about your poetry background. I'd love to hear how you got into poetry yourself.
Oh, goodness. Well, I think like most writers, I kind of started as a child. So I began writing when I went to grammar school back in Manchester in some distant and remote prehistoric time, 1970s. And the world was a very different place. And I kind of, I had a really fantastic, well, I had a series of really fantastic English teachers, but one in particular was a supply teacher. I think he was called Mr. Deakin. And this chap came in as a supply teacher and was trying to take control of a kind of unruly class of young grammar school boys, and we were all terribly misbehaved. And one day, he was getting us to read a bit of Shakespeare, and people weren't paying attention, and he threw the book through a window and shattered the glass, and there was kind of absolute silence and astonishment. And there were, a few minutes went by, and then suddenly the headmaster appeared through the door and said, could I have a word? And kind of escorted him out. And it oddly, it really opened my eyes, because I thought, gosh, words really matter. People can be really passionate about them. And from that point on, I kind of got hooked on language, really, and trying to write. And we used to, I don't know if you remember at school, and you're often given these things where you're given a kind of small prompt, half a sentence, and the exercises, finish off, write a story of 600 words or whatever, And I used to love those, because you kind of, it's like you're really, I like writing prompts are often fun, but I love the idea of this kind of like, in medias res, you're kind of there suddenly in the middle of something that you were in control of, and you have to make sense of it. And I liked conjuring worlds, that was, I think that was probably one of the things that tempted me into it. And the more I did it, the more I liked it. And, with, I suppose, a lot of people kind of wrote and won school prizes and stuff like that. And then suddenly realized that it really was in me, and I was gonna keep doing this. And I never really stopped, to be honest. It for me. I didn't study literature. I ended up moving into graphics and fine art, which I loved. And I had a very charismatic teacher, so I kind of went off in a different direction. But I never stopped writing. And so it became, I think it's from this very early, from being about aged 11. That's when I kind of realised I wanted to do it, and became very serious about it when I was an undergraduate, and really wanted to try and raise it up a level. And that's, I think it's a very similar kind of story to most writers. Start young, keep going.
I'm not sure the book Through the Window is similar to everyone else's stories, though. That's quite a unique.
Well, I often wonder whatever happened to him, because he was so passionate. He was a fantastic teacher.
Yeah.
And he didn't, sadly, after that incident, I don't think he lasted much longer. But I owe him a tremendous debt, because he really opened, not just poetry, he opened up the whole world of literature to me, and made me realise that these things can become part of you. And in a way, actually, really, the real gift is that, and I think this is the central thing with literature, is you're given the blessing of other lives, so you don't have to just live your own life. I get bored with mine. You get bored of me, and through literature, you get access to to these kind of never-ending worlds. People, writers just keep bringing new things, and I just find that totally compelling, really. And I'd rather have lived more than one life at the same time, and books do that. So that's the moment, really.
I mean, I think that links really nicely to your poetry because you're reading from Modern Fog today.
Yeah.
And I mean, when we've talked about it a bit, we sort of pinpointed it as you using these personal vignettes to sort of that then feed out to wider experiences of the world and landscapes and other people's experiences. And they all feel like, I can't remember who you said this, but they feel like these extra mini short stories each poem does. Who was it who said that?
It was either David Morley or George Surtees, I think, that said that of my last collection, which was called The Departure. And I think they got that absolutely right. And it's continued. I think from that book, which came out in 2012, that's kind of been my modus operandi, really, is to try and find these tiny compressed lyrics that transport you into another life. I'm always mystified. You're kind of walking down the street, or even if if you're on the bus or you're in a cafe and you overhear a snatch of conversation, and you can sometimes feel that you're entering into this other world that you're absolutely not part of, and you're often left wondering, what kind of life does this person lead? And I find that fascinating, and I try to capture that in some of the things I write. So I think that's one of the box of tricks. That's one of them. What's this person doing? Where are they? What's their experience like?
And I mean, so you mentioned the last publication was 2012.
Yeah,
Why over the past 10 years have you not released anything in book form?
I think, well, a number of reasons. I mean, after The Departure came out, I mean, I was at that time I was. Actually, it was my poetry editor. I run a publishing company called Salt, and at that time we had a poetry editor called Ruddy Lumsden, absolutely fantastic editor, very gifted, very complicated guy, supremely talented writer and teacher, and he persuaded me to bring a book out, and in the wake of that, the business was going through incredible turmoil at the time. And after I published it, I kind of drifted off, I think, and was thrown into all kinds of issues with driving the changing direction of the company. We moved very heavily into fiction publishing and had some real successes. And I got totally embroiled in the publishing world, really, for quite a long time. And I didn't stop writing. I thought I'd stopped writing. And I thought that kind of I'd exhausted, drained the well, and there was nothing left. And I was going to have to just see what happened. And I did get really anxious about it for quite some time. But when I look back, I mean, in 2017, I got up one morning and I thought I've got to really get back and find some space for writing again. In fact, we were talking about this before we started this session. And if you don't actually carve out space for it to happen, well, it won't happen.
Yeah.
It won't turn up and surprise you. You've got to go after it. So I started to kind of create some space in my life to write again, and started. And when I started, I made a habit of doing it every day. And first of all, I mean, no expectation it was going to be any good. And I mean, let's face it, a lot isn't. So you have this, you have a kind of small hit rate, and it's always surprising and delightful, But it's the practice is the thing that makes your imagination work. You have to turn up. You have to let it. You have to let it come out. So I did, and when I did that, it made me look back at what I'd actually been doing with more fugitive attempts at writing over the prior few years, And I realized that I'd never stopped. I was lying to myself that, that I'd had a dry period. I was always writing, somehow or other. I found things tucked away in, strange archives and remote parts of the internet where, hidden on websites and, fragments written down in notebooks. And so I realized that I just had to get back to it really and really attend to it. And so I started drawing together some of these pieces and realized that there was in fact a book emerging. And so I kind of really pushed through during that 10-year period to create Modern Fog, which became the kind of, in a way, a follow-up to The Departure. The Departure was a book about, in part, it was about changing my life because we'd lived in Cambridge for many years, and we decided we were going to move, and the move, the physical move, moving our children, coming to a different part of the country, setting up a new home, refreshing the business and taking that up in a different direction. These were all things that kind of underpin The Departure, and I saw it as a kind of exile. That I was entering remote North Norfolk, which you know well. And I felt like I'd travelled to the ends of the earth. It's remote. North Norfolk is it's very beautiful. It's very rural. It's very remote, and you do feel cut off, which is its great pleasure as well. So I think that The Departure was this kind of like leave. It was literally a departure, and a departure of style too, because before this I'd been associated in part with a movement in poetry. Well, Cambridge poetry was a kind of experimental poetry, and I'd published 2 collections that were deeply experimental and political. And The Departure was a move into a more accessible and an easier space, more driven by wanting to have a relationship with readers. So Modern Fog it really carries on from that. But in essence, it's the journey back now. And as we were chatting yesterday, it's there's a lot of Norfolk in the book, and so the book is a kind of an homage to Norfolk landscapes and people and experiences. But I'm in a way, I'm coming back into the world now through this book. So it's a kind of reappearance. And of course, when I finalised it, I was finalising it right on the cusp of lockdown. And who knew, that I completed it about 2.5 years ago. And just as I was starting to think, where will I pitch this, and I very much wanted it to go back to my first publisher, a terrific press called ARC in Todmorden in the north of England. And but then lockdown hit, and so it's been a very, very strange period. Another kind of I don't know, kind of limbo, I suppose, as we've all been trying to find ways of dealing with what coronavirus has brought us all. This kind of strange isolation and the kind of separation of ourselves from our normal working lives. So that's it's been it's interesting. So the book is a for me anyway is a book of transformations.
I have to say, also actually just touching on what you were saying to begin with, in terms of ratio, the more you write, I think the more likely there's going to be something good in there. So it's so a case of just writing. But yes, this book, I've loved reading from it. For anyone who's watching and doesn't know, I grew up in Norfolk, so there are lots of places in here that are very close to my heart. And I think it would be nice to hear your first poem, a place that I know well and you know very well, which is Cromer.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, this is there's a reference in this poem which I'll just explain. There's a reference to a number which is 430,000. And that's actually years. The Cromer sits on top of a glacial ridge called the Cromer Holt Ridge, and it was formed at the end of the Ice Age in about 430,000 years ago. And in fact, there were 2 glacial kind of sheets that kind of came together and forced this ridge up. And it's a very, very in terms of geology, it's a very unusual physical kind of place, really, and it adds a great mystery to Cromer. But well, that's the number, Cromer. Come with me to Cromer Ridge. I have 430,000 reasons to make you rich. The cogs of the moraine and sewing wheels of sharp turns. Just watch that lone muntjac swim. Who knew? Under a peach and butter sky, as the sun learns its lines from the beach's cobbled scabs and tatters, and everything is new for you. And look again, the muntjac is staggering free from the fan white surf now. And the first people have arrived to spear the light loaned to them, and they are staggered. You can push through your hard breath into the decadent, loyal plush of landslips and mudflows that twist the cliff face here over the mad bone horde of this far east, faced north in the arc of nothing hole, the broken feast that barks and screeches farther and farther and leaves you undone, burning under a partial moon and this lifting sun.
Thank you, Chris. A wonderful poem to kick off with, and I'm kind of stuck on those lines in the second stanza that say, under a peach and butter sky, as the sun learns its lines from the beach's cobbled scabs and tatters. And it just makes me think of, I mean, that nothing beats a Norfolk sunset or sunrise. It really doesn't. I mean, I remember being at uni and obviously in a city. I think I might have told you this already, but we'd be in a city and the sun would be setting and everyone would be standing looking in awe, saying, this is gorgeous. And obviously I would appreciate it, but I would also be thinking, doesn't stand up against a Norfolk sunset. It's not the same.
No, it doesn't. It's extraordinary for that. Well, I mean, and as well, I mean, a feature that people won't realise about where we have both lived is you can get up in the morning and watch the sunrise and sunset over the sea. It's an extraordinary physical space to be in. Although we're at the furthest point east in a way, we're also the furthest point north you can get on this, on the bump of East Anglia. So you're facing the Arctic, really.
Yeah.
It's an amazing place to be in, and it's one of the things I still love now. I mean, I've lived here for 11 years, and I love going out and seeing the tourists arrive and watching them stop and look at sunrises and sunsets. Paralysed by the astonishing beauty of it all. It's an amazing place to be. Very lucky to be here.
The huge skies. Absolutely. And I think what I really like about this poem is the sort of the awareness of like the process of things. I mean, you mentioned sort of like the histories, but there's those lines where you say everything is new for you, and look again, and it's sort of, there's this awareness that things keep turning, and there's this cycle, and I don't know, I feel like that feeds into some of your other poems. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. I'm fascinated by the new.
Yeah.
There's I think I remember once actually I think it might have even been Roddy. He asked a question once about at what point in your life did you realise that everything was going to be the same forever, and I thought, it's not. It's not ever the same. Every day is new and a blessing. And that's really how I thought, gosh, I really experience the world really very differently here. And and I hate the sameness. I hate anything that stays the same. And in a way, I want the poems to do that. I want the poems to kind of lift people out of themselves and give them other worlds. But I think it's one of the great things I think about North Norfolk and its incredible open skies and the physical beauty of nature in North Norfolk is every day feels like a new gift. It sounds really cheesy, but it really does. And you only need to go down, if you're ever, if you've had a bad day, you just need to go down, walk on the beach, and the whole world opens up again.
Yeah.
So everything, I always feel every morning the world is refreshed, new possibilities, new openings. And I wanted to kind of write a poem about that, and actually part of it was inspired by a real incident that we were down on the pier and did see a deer run out and head into the sea and swim right past the pier and
Wow.
back. And it was so it was, a strange thing. It's very rare. You don't normally see deer
No.
swimming in the North Sea. But there it was, and I thought, wow, something new every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, shall we hear your next poem? It kind of linking into that idea of offering new worlds to people. I think that this next poem, it does that. It offers um, lots of different points of people's lives. So I'll hand over to you to read it.
Okay, well, uh, this is another poem actually inspired by real memories. You can it's poems you often find yourself raiding your past. But millions of years ago, when I was a young lad, my family used to keep all of its photographs in an old purple satin box. It was actually a case which my father bought my mother some pajamas, and she kept the box because she loved it so much, and all of our family photos ended up in it. And I thought, actually, I think I might pinch this. This might be a very good foundation for a poem. So I wrote this poem, and it's called The Memory Box. Put back the large plate shots, tintypes, all cream and sienna crackle your, and put back the dubious Polaroid with its cyan veneer. Put back the decal-edged monochrome snaps, and the impossible fragile thumbnails too. Put back all the views of carless lanes, pale smocks and strap sandals, and puffed vintage cloud. The unremembered, incoherent garden with its lavish, brutal rhododendrons groping someone, hidden, blurred, twisting out of frame. Then fold the tea-stained tissue back that Edith ripped in '67, arguing with Albert or Edward over matins and cake. When the Blackpool band played something quite unusual on the radio, but no one noticed. And once they are all imposed and ordered, squirm your hands over the piles to smooth down its patchwork, levelling out the paper residue of pals and foes we shall eventually burn, discard, or sell on a trestle table in the Jubilee Hall no one visits now. And then take the satin lid with its tiny purple regal hem and push it slowly down on that box that softly resists and makes an incontrovertible hiss, like this. The very sound our past makes, with its hair cream and antimacassars, the sound of someone sucking false teeth at an extravagant, expensive fabric, the sound of the quince-flavoured breath of someone about to begin their last errand on earth. Now lift the box to smell our loneliest ever island. Place it in the drawer and shut it tight.
Thank you. I don't even know where to begin with this poem. It's beautiful, and there's so much in it. So many tiny little spotlights. I think. Um, One thing that did stand out for me is when you mention the idea of um, the things that you shall eventually burn, discard, or sell on a trestle table in the Jubilee Hall that no one visits now. And it's sort of, in my head, it reminded me of a Meet the Poet that I did with another Chris Hardy. And he read a poem about uh, going past house who he kind of knew, and they'd passed away, and all of their belongings were out on the garden in front of their house as like a car boot sale, and everyone was, random strangers were coming along, picking up stuff, buying things, and kind of the heartbreak of that in a way, how someone's whole life, can be sort of boils down to these things, but that also can be so easily disposed and sort of picked apart by strangers in a way.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, this is. I mean, when we visit, I mean, there are. We often have these. We do have, as you'll know, we have these kind of trestle table sales in Jubilee halls around in Norfolk villages, and sometimes larger affairs. Some of the country houses where people gather stuff, and regular, Saturday car park sales of what can sometimes seem like tat. And I'm fascinated that. And when you get, if you go into places, secondhand stores, and find photographs, you have to remember that these are in fact memories of real people, with families that have been, in a way, have been lost to time, but you can recover them. And so I think there is there is this feeling that one of the saddest things you ever do is to clear a house, and it's. And in a way, as you travel through life, it happens to, because your parents, your parents keep treasures from you, and at some point they hand them back as if they're handing you back your childhood.
yeah,
And you think, oh, that's so sweet. You kept this thing that I drew badly, in 1968, and you look at it and you think, well, why would I keep that? It's not
yeah,
actually very good, and I don't feel really very much about it. But life is full of these things, things that people treasure and keep, protect. And if you sometimes you re-inherit them, But I kind of wanted to write. I mean, I know it's quite a sad poem in a way, but I wanted to capture the fleetingness, of life, and the transience, of life, and our personal memorabilia. And it's one of the weirdest things when you have family photos. And I don't know if you keep them. I certainly do myself.
yeah.
I don't like looking through them very often. I hate that kind of, I hate confronting myself or
Really,
past. I find it depressing. But
it's
I
my
like
favorite thing. I love it.
yeah, and I like, I was looking back. I was kind of researching back, looking at really family photos of kind of great grandparents and so on, which some of whom I never met, never knew. And you feel this, that they are absolutely genetically, part of you, but you just have no sense of who they were or what their lives were like, except for the appearance in the photo. And of course, I mean, we have this abundance of visual memories now, with endless selfies and endless ways of capturing ourselves, including what we're doing right now. But this kind of technology didn't exist, for my father, and so recent family, and you kind of and I lost my father when I was quite young, and one of the things that I ponder over is I've no idea what he sounded like. I can't remember him. And these days we've got this kind of superabundance of audio-visual imagery. So I wonder, in a way, these old boxes of photos that come along, you forget that all, you can lift something up, and that could be the entirety of the memories of a generation. A handful of photos, because they were so rare.
Yeah,
Uh,
you're right. We live in a world now where things are so easily documented, and I think
very,
that this poem is a lovely moment, especially because of what you said earlier about how you like to think how everything is new. You love the new, and you don't like to think that everything is the same. So this is almost a moment that allows you to have that brief looking back and exploring those
yeah,
things that wouldn't have been so easily documented, but then
yeah,
also getting to the end of it and placing it in the drawer and then shutting it tight.
yeah,
And then that the poem it encloses all of those memories and all that documentation very
yeah,
neatly.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting because it's to both conceal and treasure.
Yeah.
It's to conserve, and hide, and which is what boxes of photographs do. Until you open them up, and then you're introduced into another world again.
Yeah. Okay, Chris, can we hear your next poem? I think this one is Day Fox.
You certainly can. Okay, this yet another real incident sparking a poem. There was a, we don't often get to see foxes where I am. See deer more often than foxes. But one day there was a fox, and it was actually on my commute to work, and sadly it had been killed, and must have been struck by a car, and it stayed on a verge for weeks and weeks and weeks, and so it's a rather grim poem about decay in a way, but they're such marvelous creatures when you see them, and you may see them, well, you see them at different times of day, often in the evening, but this is called the day fox. He had walked through Almaton to rest and lie in thin December sun, uncrushed, not timid, but perfect there. His dream words fished out beside an untrimmed singing verge. On our first drive, he looked living amber lying on lurid green moss all afternoon, the way a boy lies spent in a dark field, unaware of linnets and nuthatches, seeing only thin cirrus turning like milt in clear water, the day aging and running. The next time we saw him, he gathered in weather, respectably dozing as dry week hours moved their clocks around him, with fresh silt driven in by the Felbrigg traffic, dulling the understory tableaus, where he had stayed his gorgeous ginger. And then I lost sight of him, and wondered weeks later if rooks had come and picked at him. The day drives grew colder now. The fields tore their wounds free, and the hill storms rushed in with high seas and moon-sharp cold. But then I noticed him today, unemployed, beside the chrome-green residuum. His pelt was coal tar black and slicked back on the tiny lump of him, rain-polished and wasting, but not burst or ripped gaudily into dinner. He was pathetically shiny and underfeatured in the wet waste where it seemed cruel nothing had feasted on him. He was slowly withdrawing from us, nothing to clear the debris of him. The world relaxed into him with all its fiery prayers.
Oh, thank you, Chris. This is probably one of my favourites, actually, of the ones that you're reading today. I think it's just it's heartbreaking, actually, that line that it seemed cruel nothing had feasted on him, because it takes you by surprise, and in itself is a very sort of, it feels very gruesome, a gruesome act, but also that's part of the circle of life, and it feels so jarring for the fox to be left out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. God,
Absolutely. Well, where you and I come from, rural Norfolk is rural, and life is a I think people that grow. I mean, I grew up in the city. I grew up in Manchester, but I've lived in the country for years and years and years, 20, 30 years, and it's very, very different. The experience of people is very different. I think people who come from rural England or any of the other nations, you're more confronted by life, I think, in a way, because you do see an awful lot of animals dying, and killing each other and surviving, and it gives you, and I think that the landscape too, kind of, you're living out in the country, you are confronted by the fragility of life, I think, in a way, which returns you to life, I think, more violently, and so I wanted to kind of capture that in a way, what survives, and although it's grim, it's a kind of it's also something to celebrate.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I have to say, actually, the first time reading it, it took me a little bit of time to realize that he'd been dead all along, because the way that he seemed so beautifully preserved right from the beginning of the poem.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, but you're right. I think there is something about being confronted with animals dying all the time out in the countryside. It makes you get used to it in a way, and you are. I
you
think
do.
who was it? Someone was telling me about how, I might have said this many times to many different people, but how Buddhist monks, they tend to. I think every morning they remind themselves that they're going to die, and that sort of fuels them on to actually live. And there's something about that, bringing yourself back to life through
Yeah,
reminding yourself of the nature of things and the nature of life.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
a deep
Yeah.
thought, but yeah, it just reminded me of that.
Well,
Um,
it's kind of memento mori, isn't it?
yeah.
Another facet of this is, going to any church in North Norfolk, and we
Yeah.
have a lot of them.
We
And
do.
there's some amazing wall paintings, and they're often, paintings of corpses and in various states of decay. And it was this medieval tale, Three Princes tale, of being confronted with the dead and the recently dead, warning you about your attitude in life. And it's I quite like that. I quite like being reminded to pay attention to life and live it. Because you've got to live it. And so
Yeah.
maybe that's what the day fox is. Maybe it is a memento mori. Maybe it's there to remind us
Mm.
uh, to live harder, live more furiously.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. And I keep coming back to that line in it as well. As dry, weak hours moved their clocks around him, and how, it's sort of, even in death, it's like the fox is still. I mean, as I said before, it's like he's still living, but it reminds you exactly of that.
Yeah,
That yeah, you how the control you have over your life and your choice to live, despite the time that goes on around you.
yeah.
Um, okay, well, I think from one sort of driving poem to another, let's hear your next poem, One Drive in Winter.
Okay, a little happier maybe this. There's, this is another. And maybe all these poems are influenced by real actions. There are some fantastic drives. I love driving around North Norfolk, and we've over the years we've been oh gosh, so many places. And you often find these really lonely rural roads that kind of skirt along the coast, and there's sometimes a kind of ridge, kind of a marram grass covered ridge, before that keeps the sea just out of sight, and probably keeps the sea just off the land, because a lot of the land is below sea level. And you sometimes find yourself driving on these remote roads, wondering where on earth they lead, and what you'll discover. And I think that's in fact, one of the most amazing things I think about living in Norfolk is my wife and I often joke, turning right. And it's being on a major road and then turning off a road. They're usually unsigned. How many roads are unsigned in Norfolk? And you kind of turn off right, bear right, and suddenly you're in another world, and you don't, you've absolutely no idea where you are. There's no village. Or you have that strange thing where you get villages like Northrepps that seem to occur in like 7 or 8 places, each miles apart, and they have no sense of centre or cohesion. Or you find yourself in the middle of some country estate, that you had no idea existed, that's still in private hands. So uh, this is a poem kind of like that, poem of discovery. One drive in winter. How far and why anyone would bother? Where our sat-nav phased out and ran clear. The petrol light flicked on. The road ahead fringed with sycamore trees that then faded. The lane tipped out beside dumped farm metal and plucked fields. We killed the engine. It all seemed fine, so fine, before the rain weakly snaked over that maroon and lemon sky. Well, if you think of it, that low burst world, our maps spread out, the car cooling, us curled over the old seats. I want you to know I would drive there again, the same, just so, to understand your low breath in the frost, to make of it what we can, to laugh there, to solemnize the marginal and lost, to hold you close, to hear the inland shore.
Beautiful poem. Those last two lines, I think they kind of speak volumes for, like, speaking for the other poems as well, covering so many of the things that we've talked about. Um, Looking back to, the marginal and lost, but also the juxtaposition of these deeply personal stories and experiences, and then the large landscape and greater experiences, the shore, and yeah, it's a
Thank you.
beautiful poem.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much.
I have to touch on you describing it before you read it as a poem of discovery, which I think is a lovely way to see it, in the sense that, because you were talking about traveling around Norfolk, driving, and roads not being signposted and everything, and it's nice to see it as a sense of discovery rather than getting lost, because I mean, as someone who's had to get a lot of buses, in particular around Norfolk, and especially, late at night, so it's completely pitch black, you can't see anything, and there's nothing, no voice comes up saying you're approaching so and so. So you just sort of have to sit and hope that you're vaguely in the right area, and kind of jump off at a random hedge when you think that you're near to your destination. um, which, yeah, it's very easy to get lost, I think, around these areas.
It truly is. Yeah, it really
Yeah,
is. Which I do. I love that. I love that
yeah,
about Norway. I often think of it. I mean, it's I mean, England is so incredibly developed. It's the one of the counties. I think North Yorkshire's like this too. It's a
mm,
place where you can encounter wilderness, and that's so rare these days. I think in life, but you can suddenly, you may only be, half a mile away from a main road, but you can't hear it or see it, and
yeah,
you are suddenly isolated. In fact, it's one of the great things that I love about the Norfolk Broads.
mm,
You can spend a week or 2 weeks on the Broads on a boat, and you're
mm,
a million miles away from anywhere, and you're only traveling at kind of 5 miles an hour,
yeah,
and you normally kind of whiz through it, at 60 in
yeah,
your car and not notice any of the landscape because it's hidden from you,
mm,
But in the Broads, you're suddenly forced into nature, and I love that. I love that. I love the slowness of that, the slowness of Norfolk, maybe.
mm,
Uh, it's a place where your life has to slow down. Uh, and you just, there are so many riches in the county. If
yeah,
you do, and it is a really beautiful county.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think maybe let's stay on a roll and head over to your next poem. I think this is your second to last poem. We've got one poem after this one, which we'll treat ourselves for at the end of the program, but um, one of your last poems, which is The Seal.
And great link there. I hadn't planned this at all, actually, but there's a great link because it's a Broads poem. And this is a poem. When we used to holiday with our children. We've got 3 children, and when we moved here, we started quite early on taking them onto the Broads, and we had to learn what holidays on the Broads were like because we were quite innocent and didn't realise how much to pack or what to pack. And if the weather turns, they can be very wet holidays, and you never dry out. So we kind of we learned a lot, but we've had some just amazing times traveling around the rivers of North Norfolk, and we've done both the North and South Broads, and this is a towny poem in a way because one day we were on the Broads and we suddenly met a seal, and we didn't know that they could come inland. So we rang we rang the agency and said, we've just discovered a seal. Is this is this is it allowed? And how they stop themselves laughing, I don't know. But it's got there's a lot. The family all laugh at this point, but it's real. And in the last line, for those people who know nothing about seals, and there may be a few, you have to look up the last line, the reference to it. You have to look up the teeth of a seal. Just Google it and look at the images. The seal. This is for Manitza Alvi. We almost missed you in the Bure, boulder-headed, as the river bent towards Achill. There you were, all half-term nonchalance, fishing. And we were shocked how far you'd come, to blink and watch our boat purling through the big afternoon. We smiled, and then you were gone. River god, sleek night bones, your soaked trunk twisting through ochre waters, so special and remote and even-handed, taking what you wanted of bream or perch or roach. That night, I dreamed you drew through the shining mud and raised yourself among low trees, your dowsing coat still sleek and wet, stepping out with that whiskered smile and the fleur-de-lis of your teeth.
Thank you, Chris. And I have just, whilst you were reading that, I Googled seals' teeth, which I've never seen before, and they are quite astonishing.
They are quite something.
Yeah.
They are
Yeah, wow.
So now you'll never ever forget that.
I'll never forget that. I used to see seals as a very, very sort of, I don't know, a very normal kind of creature, and now I see the teeth, I'm not going to forget that whole thing.
They've got crazy teeth. Yeah, they're marvelous, marvelous things. I do love seeing them. And now I've been been traveling on the Bure and the Ant so many times. You see them all the time. They do come right in and fish. Nice captive waters, lots of things to eat.
Yeah.
Anyway, for those people listening, if you've never been on the Broads, go. You've got to go to the Broads. It's a truly spectacular place.
I completely agree. And Chris, thank you so much. I mean, you've sort of given a really beautiful depiction of the Norfolk landscape, as well as so many other things, and it's been wonderful to have you on Meet the Poet. And to everyone who's been watching at home, thank you so much for watching. If you have any thoughts or comments on Chris's work, then obviously leave them in the chat box below. And as usual, you can follow us on all of our socials at Homestage Poetry and sign up to our mailing list if you want to be notified about all future things like this. Chris, thank you so much again for joining us. And I will hand over to you to read your last poem, which is the title poem of the collection, Modern Fog.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody that's listening. It's been fantastic, really enjoyable. Modern Fog. Then it passed between us as you opened your Alazarin mouth by the river. Axminster carpets, TV mercy, crystal lights shut away in the dead TV. The TV passes its square of sky on a trip where we died inside you, and the far capital with all its pain and lavish figs was spent. How can you be here instead of this? I move my hands over you, and you burst into a modern fog.
This is a story of the seven, but not solely. For it is a story of you, and it is a story of me. It is a story of we brought to life through aged archetypes as they strive to fight the roles their society prescribes.